Amahra Spence is an artist, organizer, culture producer, and spatial practitioner, and she's passionate about community systems, architecture, and narrative. In 2013, Amahra established MAIA, an organization supporting artists to change the world through infrastructure building, resources, and redistribution, platforming and programming. And just recently in 2020, she launched the Black Land and Spatial Justice Project with a campaign to raise 30,000 to invest in knowledge production, experimentation and transformation action in natural and built environments. And Amahra, I'm super happy that you're here, and you're one of people that I know the shortest, but already had some amazing inspirational conversations. So I'm looking forward to hear from you now.
Oh, thank you so much. And we're family now, so that's it, you know. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I'm gonna try and share my screen and see if this works. And while I'm sorting this out, I would just love to echo the point of not really digging Zoom, because I was watching a talk the other day, and Claudia Alex said she was talking about missing the haptics of being in community, and I feel that so deeply. I'm missing the haptics of being with other people. So hi, my name's Amahra Spence, and I'm an artist and spatial practitioner. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I've been thinking a lot about what gave me the license to practice the work that I do, and in many ways, you know, what is the DNA of my practice and of me coming to this work. And any opportunity to talk about this guy, I take it by both hands. This is Laurence Fishburne from Boys in the Hood. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But I think so much about the radical imagination. And I was reminded recently by a new friend, Brian Seeley Jr., based out in New Orleans, who was talking about the etymology of the word radical. And essentially, you know, it really comes down to just getting to the root of what does it mean to get to the root of anything. So I think a lot about the radical imagination, and particularly the radical Black imagination. And sometimes we can call the manifestations of that art. I think about Black cinema classics that introduced me to spatial practice. When I think about Boys in the Hood, which was the first time I ever heard the term gentrification when I was about 10 years old, and Furious Styles, Laurence Fishburne, got up on the hill and he was talking about land values, and what happens to a neighborhood, and he was talking about displacement, and I had learned that vocabulary at a really young age, and I was able to observe that in my own community quite early on. I think about movies like Friday and being able to articulate those as, you know, a spatial practice film. In many ways, my understanding about art and spatial practice was molded by Black cinema, but it was also molded by Black music. I am a child of the grime era. I am a hip hop nerd, like through and through. And I'm fascinated by these genres, partially because they are, you know, they're social critiques of their environment. The environments themselves, they necessitated their birth. If we think about the estates in East London that birthed grime music and garage, if we think about in New York, the Sedgwick Avenue, what many describe as the birthplace of hip hop, it was their environments that necessitated their birth, and these environments were brutal. We're talking about crappy policy and planning. We're talking about really bad, poor, and unkept, under-resourced architecture and neighborhoods. So these environments were really brutal, but here are people being permanently beautiful and brilliant and creative, and birthing something beautiful and global that we now call art through their expression. And really it was art that gave me the license to think about space critically. It gave me a vocabulary for my observations and feelings about the environment around me. And I think that I intentionally started to really take both hands, a hands-on approach in the idea of claiming space when my brother and I, we were some of the founding members of a theatre company when we were 15 years old. We joined a theatre company led by Don Kinch called Black is Beautiful. And from then I really knew that there was a power. I truly believed in the narratives and the power and the hopes of my community. And it felt like theatre started to give me again the license to amplify those. We always said that my granddad was the first ever storyteller that we were able to be proximate to, and we inherited, you know, his creativity, his expression. Storytelling is like an inherent value and contribution of, you know, my grandfather's from Jamaica. So we, you know, in Maroon culture in Jamaica, like storytelling is just a natural sort of phenomenon. So if we're thinking about DNA and we're thinking about artistry, it's really impossible to separate the two in many ways. But I started to see that art wasn't just it wasn't just a response and an expression. This still was taken from a production that I did in 2016 and 2017, sorry, in 2017 and 2018, what is time, called Concubine, which was talking about how the music industry is complicit in the sexual violence and abuse of young women. And in many ways, I was thinking about art then about response and expression. But for me, what felt most liberating was to think about art as a tool for ideation, imagining something beyond our current paradigm. And MAIA, so the company that my best friend Amber and I, we started 8 years ago now. It was very much to inquire, what does it look like for artists to embody resistance? What does it look like to create the systems and structures for a more just world? How are artists supported? How are they resourced? But who gets to consider themselves an artist in the first place, and who gets to make their dreams real? I think that was one of the first sort of foundational questions that Amber and I were asking, was in many ways, and I think Rick had touched on this earlier and Fiona as well, that the term artist had come to mean something that it come to mean something quite particular. It was about, you know, where did you go to school and where did you train and who are you in association with, what grants are you the recipient of, what foundations, like all of these things that were like, that's not what it is to be an artist, but somehow there's a concept, you know, there's an idea of what that is, and a lot of people don't fit that narrative. So there's an inherent resistance to identify as an artist in the first place, which told us that we really had to look at the systemic. You know, we really had to go to the roots of what all of this is about, and who is denied from accessing and expanding and then acting on their radical imagination. So what are the systemic things that we have to understand and then mobilize around? And it felt like, you know, if we're talking about the one of those significant things was, of course, land and space. And when we were, we always knew that we wanted a physical space to house work and, you know, and to bring people to and to amplify stories through that space. But we knew we needed it to be sustainable. We knew that if we were going to make a space, that our communities would then become dependent and needing that space to carry on existing. And we knew that we needed physical infrastructure because we needed a base that could, you know, that could grant solace, that could be a sanctuary, a base that was for congregation and conviviality. And especially when we're talking about people that have been marginalized from other institutions, other so-called social spaces. And there's a long history of that, and there's a long history of that related to land and spatial injustice, which I'll come to. But we knew that we needed a physical space where people could feel safe. But it wasn't just enough to make that economically sustainable. It needed to be spiritually sustainable, and this was very much where we started to think, we're trying to create from the precedents that bring us joy. We're trying to create from precedents that don't exist in our sector. So we can't then go and recreate another white cube art gallery. We can't create another theatre space in its traditional sense. We can't go and create the spaces that are continuously causing our communities harm. So we have to create from a new precedent. And that has to be rooted in joy, but it also has to be rooted in healing. And it feels like I'm a big advocate of transformative justice. I believe that justice is necessary for change, and the change that lots of people talk about us needing, it can't be rooted in punishment, and it can't be rooted in even repairing harm and returning us back to where we were before a harm took place. It needs to transform from the root, from the soil itself. We need to transform from the very initial conditions, and that's what's necessary for healing. And the question is, how do you bake, how do you sew in healing within infrastructure? So we started to design a physical space that could be rooted in the places that bring us joy, and where better than my grandparents' house, which I'm going to paint a picture of my grandfather's house just for some context. If you can imagine, it's Boxing Day and there are, I mean, this is pre-COVID, right? You know, we dream. Pre-COVID Boxing Day, like there are children just lined up the stairs and running through the house and just dancing and singing. Like my granddad's kitchen was like the central hub. There would be like a dining table in the back room that you can actually go into, because the front room is sacred for like monuments and like glass trinkets and vases and stuff that you can't sit in unless you're in trouble. And then there's a lively living room where it's full of debates, it's full of conversation and discussion and singing and music and film. And we said we want to create from that spirit. We want to create from the spirit of our grandparents' homes. Other people find that in other places. The libraries that we've lost, the youth centres that we've lost, the community hubs that we've lost. That's where we can really start to sew in what healing infrastructure looks like. We've already had the precedents for it. It's just, how do we make it financially and spiritually sustainable? So one thing that we acknowledged was, we're in an industry that believes that it hasn't got any money. It's actually got a lot of money, it just doesn't redistribute it very well or very equitably at all. So what we said is, can we design a bit of infrastructure that redistributes the cultural sector's hospitality spend in a much more community rooted way? How can we design a community infrastructure that we can hold on to the value of, while also redistributing the energy of our beautiful creative city of Birmingham? And so we put out the vision for this gorgeous space called Abuelos. Abuelos is Spanish for grandparents or grandfather. And this is, again, so Yard is the first iteration of what Abuelos is going to become, which is an artist-led hotel and community resource, which redistributes its money back into local people, local projects, local artistry, and local initiatives. One of the things that we've been seeding at Yard is, over the period of lockdown, we noticed that there were a lot of people who were sort of like hustling on Snapchat. So like everyone suddenly started up a little food business, because, you know, everybody's lost their jobs and still needs income. So everybody had started like a little like side hustle. They were selling like meals through Snapchat. So Amber and I got together and said, is there a way that we can support, you know, people who are at that stage of their career? And maybe it's about, you know, they actually need their, you know, food hygiene, health and safety certificates and all that kind of stuff. Can we resource people? Can we share what we have so that they can cover their ones and twos? Can they use the kitchen, you know, as a sort of like a chef in residence, just as much as we're going to have artists in residence at Yard? And can we start to build a bit of an independent ecology in that way, that is just built on recirculation? And how can we seed that to go into Abuelos? And I want to talk a little bit about resistance here, because in many ways it feels like we can't do this work without talking about extraction, without talking about how the value of what we create is extracted if we don't hold on to the value of it ourselves, if we don't know all of the spaces that can be extracted from. If we can't talk about extraction without talking about how culture is extracted. In the slide before, in this image, we were invited to produce a project working with SBTV, and the developer that we partnered with on that project was really excited. They want us to come in. And when they saw, like, it was like, you know, 200 young Black people who were having the most incredible time. It was a gorgeous sunny day. We had like free bagels. It was beautiful. There was music all day. And the developer at the end of the day said, well, that was really good, but if I'd have brought my mom here, she would have been really uncomfortable. What is it about Black people enjoying themselves that would make you feel so uncomfortable? You know, we can't separate a conversation about extraction without talking about race and culture. Why is it that people are pro-Black culture but against Black people? How is it that Black people continue to be mined and exploited of their energy, of their resources, of their artistry, and aren't receiving the value or sharing the value of what they create? But what blows my mind is that we still go on. And it feels, even if, you know, people can take the surface level off of what we do, but they can never take that spiritual impetus. They can't take the sort of deeper spiritual resonance with which we create from. And so we go on and we start to imagine a realm beyond capitalism. I'm gonna stop that here, because I just want to talk about the Black Land and Spatial Justice Project, which I started. So last year, it felt like the UK was having a conversation about the public realm, about physical infrastructure, about the built environment in a way that it never had done before. And that was at the moment, so in the aftermath of the George Floyd uprisings, in the aftermath of his murder, the Colston statue was torn down in Bristol. And suddenly we were talking about monuments in a way that I haven't seen the UK talk about monuments in a really long time. It felt like the perfect time to acknowledge that there is a thread underneath all of this, and underneath injustice in the UK, that is about land. It's about space in all of its context. And I'm not going to get too philosophical because I know we haven't got time, but it comes as no surprise that in a country that has uphelded someone like John Locke and his theories around land rights and about public use of land, and the relationship between property rights and law, he was a person that was developing a lot of those theories that we now hold to be legally true and morally true. But he was also invested in the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, he was one of the biggest investors of chattel slavery at the time that he was developing his theories and his politics, which have infused into today. And so it's no wonder that this person who the UK uphold as the father of liberalism, and I think that's a really important point to make, that he and his contemporaries are the holders of truths that you can both invest in chattel slavery, which dehumanizes African peoples. It dehumanizes African peoples and then says, you know, any man that works on the land has the right to own it. So you've dehumanized a large population of the world and have then said any man who. So you clearly didn't mean African people when you were talking about who has the right to own and access land. And it's no wonder that we can talk about gentrification and displacement. We can talk about food insecurity and the ongoing health impacts. We can talk about disparity in education and all of those things in relation to land and in relation to space. And it has stemmed from thinkers and practitioners like that have shaped our legal system. But what continues to blow my mind is that through brutality, through violence, through extraction, we have always been creators. And I think a lot of practices originated by Black communities in the light of state resistance and state violence. If we think about, you know, the glorious community land trusts as being something developed by African American people who needed sanctuary and the right to own their own safe spaces. If we think about collective saving schemes and economic systems that are needed to actually do the work that we're all doing, it stemmed from Black people across the diaspora not being able to legally access a mainstream bank because they were racialized as other and not allowed to. And I can think about 1,000,001 other sort of radical interventions that have been rooted in Black people innovating after having been oppressed, having been erased, having been marginalized. So the Black Land and Spatial Justice Project said, what would it mean if through disinvestment, Black people have been able to produce all of this stuff? What does it mean to resource them? We knew that £30,000 was by no means going to amount to racial and spatial land justice or anything like that. But given a figure meant that it was something that people could rally around, and that the sort of continued outgoings of that have meant a sustained level of energy around that project, a sustained level of resource that can continue to invest in decolonizing frameworks around land use. And it means that now we can actually start to practice some of the stuff that we've been theorizing about. And we got the keys for yards last June, which was a glorious time to open a space, which meant that we haven't actually been able to open it until this month. We digitally launched it this month, which has been really exciting. But there's just such a wealth of organizations, of collectives, of artists, of practitioners who are making things happen right now in this moment. And this is when we can invest in beautiful things and incredible things. And I'm very just excited to get into conversation with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amahra, for this amazing presentation. And I think you brought some things to the table which I think are also very important to discuss. The fact when we're all working towards notions of land rights and ownership, that we also have to discuss about where those laws and policies that affect our environment and also stifle our communities, where they come from, where they originate from, and where we need to unpack some of these structures in order to understand how we can build back equally and equitably. And I like very much that you talk about this notion of power, with what Fiona was also mentioning, but also that you bring in that also the notion of joy. So unpacking power with joy is maybe a road to healing. That's and I don't want to synthesize, of course, what you've been talking, but there are some things that that I heard that I think are very important, and I think probably also lead back to Rick Lowe's first story about how he is also now working with his new project around the stories of people from the Black Wall Street project.